Hello beautiful people, my name is Fendi, and as you can probably tell based on my outfit, it is time for another installment of Bookie Cooking, a series on my channel where I recreate a treat from a book that I've read recently, show you guys my recipe in case you want to follow along, and talk to you about the book that inspired the treat in the first place. Today's Bookie Cooking is going to act as a bit of a double whammy for me in that I am not only recreating a dessert that had my mouth watering as a little kid when I first read this book, but I'm also going to be using this as an opportunity to basically make myself a birthday cake. Because yes, my Taurus self projected super hard on Roald Dahl's Matilda, and of course, in homage to one of literature's most famous readers, I'm going to be recreating Bruce Bogtrotter's punishment cake. Or rather, I will be making the chocolate cake that my mom makes myself and all of my siblings for our birthdays and calling it Bruce Bogtrotter's, because I simply cannot have another birthday where I am not enjoying this, my favorite of birthday treats. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I have a cake to bake and a book to talk to you guys about, so I think it's best if we just get started.
For this cake, you will need 6 eggs at room temperature, 1/4 cup of butter, 115 grams of sugar, half a cup of chocolate chips, 1 tablespoon of citrus zest, 1 tablespoon of a mix of vanilla extract and rum. I use about a 1-to-2 ratio. And finally, you'll need 3/4 of a cup of finely ground walnut meal or some sort of substitute. Today, I'm using plain wheat flour. First, grease and line a springform pan with oil or butter and parchment paper. Then preheat your oven to about 350 degrees Fahrenheit and get a pot of water heating on your stovetop. Place a heat-safe bowl on top of the water and add your butter and chocolate chips. Melt to combine and stir every so often to make sure the mixture is uniform.
While you're waiting for your chocolate to melt, the next thing you want to do is to separate your eggs into whites and yolks, putting the whites in one bowl and the yolks in another bowl. To your yolks, you're going to add your sugar and beat for a pretty long while, around 10 minutes.
So while I do this, I want to talk to you guys a bit about Matilda. But before I get into some of my favorite parts, however, I'd feel remiss not to mention some things that caught my eye on my latest reread that weren't super great. Specifically, I want to talk about how potentially harmful it can be to young readers, the demographic this book is written for, to have physical unattractiveness, and especially being overweight, act as shorthand for badness and cruelty. The antagonists of the story, Matilda's family and her headmistress Trunchbull, seemingly cannot exist on page without their quote-unquote less desirable traits mentioned. Matilda's mom is quote-unquote large, with peroxide blonde hair and mousy brown roots. Her father is quote-unquote rat-faced and sleazy, and both their behavior and certain parts of their physical descriptions are also coded, at least in my eyes, to be a caricature of like trashy poverty, which just adds to these uncomfortable feelings. Trunchbull is described as a muscular, imposing woman with like a strong jaw and big beefy arms and legs and hands. Her largeness is implied to be a negative and kind of freakish thing about her as a woman. And then even not necessarily villain-coded fat people, so children, aren't immune to this on-page ridicule. For example, Bruce Bogtrotter, the young man whose cake I'm baking today, is portrayed as sloppily dressed. Where a thin character walks, he waddles. So Dahl has written elsewhere about how true beauty comes from within and shines past any potentially quote-unquote undesirable traits. However, it's hard for that sentiment to feel true when so often he uses a lack of adherence to conventional, so read rich, thin, able-bodied, and white, beauty standards to signify the butt of a joke at best and cruelty and villainy at worst. And whether or not he means to, whether or not he believes such things himself, or rather believes what he said about beauty coming from kindness, those sorts of on-page portrayals feed into an instilling of fat phobia and biases about appearances into kids. This is very potentially harmful, and I don't know that I'm super comfortable with it.
Once your egg yolk mixture has changed color from a sort of orangey, yolky looking thing to this very thick, goopy kind of butter yellow thing, you're going to want to fold in just about a tablespoon of orange zest. You can use really any citrus. My mom likes lemon, but I think that orange and chocolate pair ridiculously well. Also make sure to add just about a tablespoon's worth of a mixture of rum and vanilla extract. And make sure to fold in your flour or flour equivalent. I am using flour this time, though normally we use ground walnuts. But of course, where would this chocolate cake be without our chocolate mixture? This is the butter and chocolate that we melted together before, and we're going to be adding this to the egg yolks and the flour. And you're going to fold all these things together until the mixture is relatively uniform. Once Once you've got all that folded together quite nice, set this off to the side and beat your egg whites until they form stiff peaks. Once those are beaten, we're going to be adding them to the yolk mixture, pouring it into our springform pan and putting it to bake.
Okay, we covered the bummers during the previous voiceover. Now let's talk about the parts I loved. The joy of Matilda, for me, lies somewhere in the idea of one who is theoretically powerless taking that power. Matilda works for every shred of respect and ability that she gains throughout this book, and I loved seeing that. And I always do whenever I read this book. From little bits of fighting back against her misogynist family via various pranks, to taking the agency to go to the library on her own, and all the way to the telekinesis that she develops. I love how much agency she takes. And I also love how she remains kind and humble throughout. Don't get me wrong, I love a messy protagonist who makes mistakes and isn't necessarily the moral center of a story, but there's a draw in this book, at least for me, for the good and kind person prevailing ultimately. Not because she uses her power to hurt, but because she is good and kind, and because she is loved, and because she loves in turn. Another main draw of the story for me is the theme of love acting as a balm and a sort of cure for loneliness. At the start of the story, Dahl doesn't have to tell us that Matilda is lonely. We see her isolation in her solo trips to the library and her attempts to interact with her family despite their disdain. She does make friends in school, of course, but as they're all under Trunchbull's evil, cruel heel, it's hard for them to fully relax around each other and really let down their barriers. And then Matilda and her school teacher, Miss Honey, develop a bond of mutual trust and care. Matilda is finally allowed to be herself and be excited about the cool things she can do, and Miss Honey can finally confide in someone who, though not an adult, seems to possess the ability to reason and empathize with her situation. When the two talk about the terror that is Trunchbull, they believe each other. Miss Honey doesn't call Matilda a liar when she confesses about her powers, and Matilda is so moved by the kindness of Miss Honey that she does her best to return it and help her out of her horrible situation. It just warms my heart the way Matilda talks with Miss Honey, that excited chatterbox way that a kid does when they learn something new and are bursting at the seams to share it. And it's doubly striking because it's completely absent elsewhere in the book. She doesn't have anyone else to talk to in this way. And later, when Matilda is moved to a more advanced class and Miss Honey doesn't have to keep the sort of teacher veneer with her, she gets to open up and love her without that level of distance. She sees a child who loves to learn and marvels in it. The both of them go from lonely and isolated to deeply cherished by one another, and the close of the book sees them choose each other as family. It is tremendously sweet and very heartwarming, though not as sweet as this cake is going to be.
Once your egg whites have been beaten into stiff peaks, you want to very, very, very gently fold them into the chocolate mixture. This is going to be providing all of the leavening for this recipe, so there's no baking soda, baking powder, anything. So you really don't want to knock any of the air out. If we were going fully by the books, we would only fold in about half at a time. But I am getting a little impatient and I want this cake to be done as soon as possible. So I put in all of the egg whites at once. Hopefully that won't bite me in the butt later on. So normally when you bake something like this, you want to make sure that once you've mixed something, the mixture is completely uniform. Here you kind of want to leave like little chunky or streaky bits of egg white. It actually just adds to the lift that the cake has in the final bake. Something like this is just about perfect. Once you're done with that, carefully and gently pour the mixture into your pre-lined and greased baking springform pan. Make sure the surface is more or less even and then pop it into the oven right away. Much like overfolding, letting it sit for too long will also let all of the air out of the egg whites and you don't want that. Once your batter has been placed in the springform pan, stick it in the oven and let it bake for about 35 to 40 minutes or until you can insert a toothpick into the center and pull it out clean. Not wet, but like slightly crumbly is ideal.
While your cake is cooling, or if you're impatient like me while it is still baking, make the chocolate glaze / filling for your cake. You'll need half a cup of sugar, a stick of butter, 3/4 of a cup of chocolate chips, and milk to your desired consistency. I prefer my glaze to be a little runnier just because I find it easier to spread over the cake, so I'll use a little bit more milk, but this bit is up to you. Pour the sugar into a heated saucepan and let it sit for a little while. Then add the butter. Alternate between letting this mixture sit and stirring so that the butter-sugar mix maybe gets a little brown but doesn't quite burn. It'll look like a thick, bubbly, almost toffee-smelling mixture. Then when it reaches a sort of golden color like a perfectly toasted marshmallow, add in your chocolate chips and stir vigorously. Then with your milk, you'll have to be a little bit fast so the mix doesn't burn. Add it in steadily and stir consistently throughout, and keep stirring until the glaze achieves an even finish. Let the glaze and the cake cool. So I was a little overzealous with letting my cake cool. I put my glaze in the fridge and left my cake to cool overnight because it was a very late hour when I decided to finally make this. But once your cake is cooled to your desired coolness, slice it in half lengthwise and spread in a layer of the glaze. Then place the top back onto the cake and cover the whole thing with the rest of the chocolate mixture. Let this sit for a while at either room temperature or, if it's warm, in the fridge, so that the glaze soaks into the cake and moistens it up and the flavors all kind of get to know one another.
It's the moment of truth time. I got myself a little slice. Let's see how this tastes. So I do prefer it with oatmeal, but this flour version is still very, very good. So Bruce Bogtrotter in the book ate a full cake that was like 18 inches in diameter and like I think twice as tall as mine was, so fully double the dimensions. I don't know that I could do that because the cake is very rich. However, it is super tasty. Bookie Cookin approved. Is that a thing I do now? I guess it's a thing I do now. And there you have it, folks. That's how I make Bruce Bogtrotter's punishment cake from Matilda. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave it a thumbs up. And if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post new videos every weekend, and I'd love for you to join my little booktube family. If you particularly enjoyed this video, I'll leave a playlist in the description box below where I link you to all of my other bookie cooking videos up to date. And if you'd like to see more bookish content from me, you can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Twitter in the description box below. Thank you again so much for watching this video, and I will see you with the next one very, very soon. Goodbye.